and welcome to another episode of Mindset Over Matter. I'm your host, Gabby Gooding, and today we are tackling all things toxic leadership and self-love in the workplace. I am very excited to have Lindsey Maza here as a guest with me today. So welcome, Lindsey.
Thank you for having me.
You are so welcome. So just a little bit about Lindsey for our listeners. Lindsey is a certified self-love coach, leadership coach, and Reiki master. After spending 14 years as a leader in the fashion industry, she became burnt out, disconnected from herself, and eventually became a toxic leader. After healing from years spent in toxic workplaces, she saw a gap in the workplace for self-love. So now she helps professional women become impactful, effective leaders without sacrificing their well-being using foundational self-love practices. In 2023, she founded the Not Your Dad's Leadership movement. This movement's mission is to bring compassion, empathy, and trust back into the workplace, one human at a time, starting with ourselves. It's about human-first leadership, creating safe workplaces for people to be human, and treating yourself as human too. This movement is rooted in anti-hustle culture and promotes self-love. The impact ripple this movement creates will change how people work, how people lead, and how people love themselves, their life, and other humans for generations to come. So beautiful. I love it already. Thank you so much for being here, Lindsey. I'm so excited to talk about all these things. We are here to address the tough questions, dig deep. I am really fascinated by your combination of expertise and experiences. So unless I missed something in the intro, let's get into it. The very first question that I have, because you speak a lot about self-love. It's like, your whole movement is rooted in this as it relates to the workplace. So I really would like to just start out by defining what is self-love to you? What does that mean? And what does it look like in the workplace?
Yeah, so self-love to me is unconditional love for yourself and loving all parts of you, even parts that you might not like that much. And it's really understanding you and knowing yourself really well and understanding your needs and honoring your needs on a day-to-day basis. So that's really what self-love means to me. And in the workplace, it shows up in so many different ways. And that's, like creating boundaries or even small stuff like taking your lunch break, going to the bathroom when you need. Like that's just stuff that's like true self-love, and being kind to yourself when you make a mistake or talking kindly to yourself. And just it can go on and on, being thankful, being grateful for yourself, trusting your decisions. Like it can show up in so many different ways in the workplace. But really, it's just honoring yourself and your needs every single day.
Hey, that's an amazing place to start. And I love that idea. The one thought that I had though is, as much as we would like to honor our needs on a regular basis, I think there's kind of two parts, maybe three parts to it that I can think of. One is understanding what our needs even are, right? And so I would maybe assume that there is some kind of work to be done on just sort of looking in and identifying what it is that we actually need, because everybody's needs are different. Second would be practicing setting those boundaries, and because that can be uncomfortable for those of us who are not used to doing that on a regular basis and kind of advocating for our needs. But the third piece is what I would like to hear your thoughts on, because even if we do those first two steps, if we are in a workplace environment that is not on that same page necessarily, and may be toxic in the sense that maybe we're kind of judged for taking our breaks, which sounds so silly to say out loud, but maybe there's an expectation that we power through our lunch and we don't take our breaks, or we don't honor our needs in those ways. And so there's a little bit of a clash there in terms of what's expected of us and kind of the change that we're trying to make. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts on how can we merge those two together. Do we have to leave our workplace if it's like that because it's just not the right place for us? Are there things that we can do to kind of meet in the middle a little bit? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so definitely it's, only can control yourself. And it really, a part of understanding your needs and knowing your needs, and that's, the work we do with self-love, is putting, like, knowing what you'll accept and not accept into your life and setting those boundaries. And you just have to trust yourself that you're going to be true to yourself. And that is a need that you're meeting for yourself, is like, these are my values. And my value is to show up for myself first, because if I show up for myself first, everyone's going to benefit. And so it's really holding strong with that. And at the end of the day to day, you're only with you and you're the one in your body. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, I'm sure at the end of the day, you want the promotion, you want your boss to love you, you want to be there for your team. But when you're not showing up for your own needs, you're going to eventually burn out. So I think it's holding true to that fact that you are not going to be the best for everyone else when you're not honoring your needs. And I think it's just maybe even writing yourself a sticky note, or like writing down affirmations, that it's important to do that for yourself. And, addressing the toxic workplace, it's like, unfortunately, not everyone has the means to just leave a toxic workplace right when it's happening. And like I said, that's when we can only control ourselves. And it's just put your head down, get the work done, and having that worth within yourself. It's like, I'm worth taking a break. I'm worth getting up and going to the bathroom. And at the end of the day, this is a job. And, and it goes around on the internet, but who's going to remember that job 60 years from now? Your friends, your family, and yourself. But you can get fired from that job in an instant. Like, I got burnt out and toxic and I got fired. So working those long hours, working through my breaks meant nothing after years and years and years of hard work. So it's really honoring yourself and just understanding, that your job is not in your worth, and your worth is made within yourself and your values and your purpose and how you love yourself and how you show up for yourself.
I'm trying personally to change my mindset a little bit around what my work identity is, or how work fits into my identity, I guess I should say, because I will admit I do have a hard time, or in the past I had a hard time accepting that I am a whole person and my whole person goes to work. It's not just, I can't really leave everything at the door and then put on a different hat and then be entirely different when I'm there, and ignore my needs that I have. Like, I've had managers tell me to leave my entire everything at the door when I get to work. And I thought, because I was brand new to the organization, I thought, well, that's just what you're supposed to do. But I actually performed the worst ever. And I probably was on the verge of getting fired due to my performance. Because I was trying so hard to do that, and it just wasn't working. And it wasn't until I actually started addressing my own needs, which was very difficult for me, that I actually was able to turn things around and improve my performance. So I do think that's worth stressing, that it's not a waste of time. It's not a waste of efforts to actually invest in ourselves as an employee, because, to your point, as sad as it is to admit, we are all replaceable, like, immediately when it comes to work, but we're not replaceable easily when it comes to our relationships that we have at home, right? Our family, our friends, and our other social circles. So definitely important to stress. Now, I wanted to go back to something that we were just saying about leaving the toxic workplace. And, not everybody has the means to do that. Let's say even that we all did have the means to leave immediately. I'm wondering, is that really the ultimate solution, is just to continue leaving toxic workplaces? Or is there something that we can do to move the dial within a workplace that is toxic? And I think by the sounds of it, a lot of the work that you're doing is to try to make changes, right? And to change the culture that does exist that can be toxic. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think we can change it, or should we just continue to leave?
Yeah, no, I definitely think that it's something that we can change. And it's kind of not going to change everything until that person at the top who's creating the toxicity leaves the company, But, if you are leading a small team or a department, you can start to create that change by learning this, self-love and loving yourself. And then you model that to other people. A lot of leadership is modeling that. If you're kind and nice to yourself, people are going to see that and they're going to feel safe to do that for themselves. If you're empathetic with yourself, if you're compassionate, they're like, oh, it's okay if I make a mistake. And you're creating that safe environment where it's not toxic. And I work with my clients, and you're still going to have the people at the top who are toxic or a toxic coworker, but it's really doing the work within yourself and learning stress management tools, energy management tools that you know how to stop it at yourself. And like one of the biggest wins was when one of my clients told me that she just came from like the most toxic meeting where the owner of the company was screaming at everyone. And, she took a few minutes for herself. I teach like a cord cutting energetic where you just release that energy out of yourself. Mm-hmm. And she was determined to not take that toxicity down to her team. And it's something that happened to me, is that I didn't learn those tools. So I just took what was being taught to me, modeled to me, and took it out, unfortunately, on the people below me. It's, trickle down leadership is what it's called. And I just didn't have the self-worth or the awareness to not stop it at me. And so that's something I really teach. Mm-hmm. And it's not something that's going to be easy. It's a challenge. And you really have to be the person if you want to step up and be the person that makes a change. But, what I've seen from doing my own self-love practices and with my clients is that it really ripples out into your team. And, maybe a different department sees how you're running their team and wants to start modeling, that after you as well. And it starts this kind of like chain reaction around the company. And maybe the people at the top are still going to be toxic, but you can make the change within yourself to model it to other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I have some questions for you about that. But just before I get there, because I would love to clarify, we've already, within the span of a few minutes, used the word toxic so many times, and for good reason, because I think that you and I we have an understanding of what that means. But if you had to try to define it, like, what is it exactly about the leadership or the organization or the workplace or the team that is toxic? What does that mean that it is toxic? And like, is it always a person? You've mentioned that there's people at the top that are toxic. Like, what does that mean that it's toxic?
It means people feel unsafe and they don't feel safe enough to be themselves, to communicate their ideas, to make a mistake, to ask for time off, to take the time off. And if they feel like they have to work on their vacation, like basically just not giving people basic human space to be a human. I can give so many examples from my workplaces, but I think it starts I don't want to say it starts at the top, because you could have an amazing boss and then they have a bad hire that's, creating this toxicity. So I don't want to say it always starts from the top. That's my experience and that's my clients' experiences. But yeah, like for me personally, I had someone who was like gaslighting me constantly. They were telling me like, no one in the office likes you, like a lot of gaslighting, isolating me from people. So like I became toxic on my own. They told me that I made too much money to actually take time off during my vacation. So even when I was on vacation, I was expected to work. Absolutely no boundaries whatsoever. They would call me at any hours of the night. Like, it's just kind of not letting people separate their lives from work. But I think the basic humanity of it, like they expect you to work through your lunch, through your vacations, and just kind of start manipulating you and micromanaging you, I think is another big part of a toxic workplace, is that you don't feel safe to just do something without double checking with that person, or they're always constantly checking your emails, or like my boss had to be CC'd on every single email that I did. So it made me not feel like I had any autonomy. So it's basically like no trust, no respect for them as human beings, and just a simple like kindness and empathy towards them being a human being. So that's how I would define toxic. I don't know if you define it differently, but that's kind of from my experiences. And it doesn't have to be at the top. It can come from anyone.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with that definition. And I'm sorry that those things happen to you. Unfortunately, I would say that it doesn't surprise me that things like that happen because you hear about it all the time, but I am sorry that it happened to you. And to me, it basically, if I could summarize, it just sounds like anything that threatens our authenticity, our humanness, and our basic needs. And it sounds like it's all in the name of productivity, I guess, and maybe some level of control that might come from a personal insecurity or a personal I don't know, just way of being, if it's coming from the top, right? If your manager's not letting go of any control and trusting and that kind of thing. So it's very heavy. Like even in my physically right now, I'm feeling like a heaviness on my chest, just talking about it and hearing about it. But unfortunately, I do know that it happens. And I think the only thing that I might add to that definition from my experience is that I think what makes it toxic is also the fact that there's nothing in place to try to stop it. And it just perpetuates itself. And to your point earlier about maybe it's not coming from the top, maybe it was a bad hire who kind of brought in that toxicity or a bad culture. That person probably learned it from someone as well. And so I think this idea of making the change or starting to make these changes at the level of leadership or management, if you have a team, is super important. So the question I was going to ask you earlier that I'm happy to come back to now is, as a leader or manager, what are some of the hard questions that we need to start asking ourselves to see if we are part of the problem and why that might be? Like, what does that look like to start changing that at the leader level?
I think that's communicating with your team, right? And kind of seeing what the productivity your team is putting out, because you may just not be aware. And I think the hard question you can ask yourself is, am I aware of what's going on? And because I was totally blind to what was happening. I thought I was just running running my team, doing all the things because I was getting results. But like looking back on it now, I probably could have gotten 10 times better results, from that. And I think it's really just gauging the energy. Like you can just feel the energy. What is the energy of my department? What's the output? And I think it really just comes with the hard question to ask yourself is, I don't want to it's like, am I the problem? That's probably the hardest question you can ask yourself. And something I wish I would have asked myself. And from there, you can take the steps, doing the self-forgiveness work and talking to your team and understanding how we can move forward and having the tough conversations. And it's really being willing to take the feedback and make the changes. So I think, the hardest question is am I the problem?
Yeah. And that's a really hard question to ask ourselves because it's really complex. And also it doesn't feel good to entertain the idea that maybe, we are part of the problem. And I think it also takes a lot of self-awareness, which I think a lot of people struggle with it just in all parts of life. And also courage to even address that question and be willing to make a change, especially if you are planning on staying in your current work environment. Because I'm picturing a manager that maybe has asked themselves this question, am I part of the problem? They come to the conclusion that yes, I am. Then how do you go and face your team and now try to start to make that change, right? It takes being able to put your ego aside, I would say, which is very difficult to do for a lot of people, and I think maybe for a lot of people, all of this just seems like too much. And they'll just say, well, I can just chalk it up to that's how the culture is. And it is what it is. So good on you for having that realization and not only just having the realization, making the changes yourself, and then going out of your way to try to help others do the same thing. And I'm wondering if there's any examples from, of course, without any specific names or maybe details, but have you had your clients come back and say, and share with you what that experience was like for them to have that realization and start to make the change? Because I assume it's difficult to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely difficult. And one of the first steps that we work on, I have a 6-step roadmap that we go through. It's called Layers to Leadership. And one of the first layers that we work on is self-forgiveness, because that's so important for self-love. And it's one of the hardest layers that we go through. And it's just life-changing for them because it gives them permission to forgive themselves for the choices that they made, because, they were doing the best they could with the information that they had at the time. And I think we really have to forgive ourselves for just doing what we thought was right in the moment. And, throughout the program, we talk a lot about, the hustle culture and the patriarchy and kind of forgiving ourselves for giving into that and putting our worth in our job. And yeah, so they've come to the realization that it was them, but they were acting within their environment, and they now know that they can make those changes. So, and like I said, it kind of rippled out through just being able to change the environment and the energy of their team. Because, one of the things I always say is that leadership starts with you, and that you're the energetic set point of your team. So they're always looking to you to be the example and to be the model. So when we give ourselves permission to just forgive ourselves for the actions that we made, you're one, can move on. And two, you're now being able to forgive others more easy and giving them permission to forgive themselves too. So, yeah.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, I felt a heaviness, and then just talking about some of this. And then now that you talked about self-forgiveness, it was a weird kind of a heaviness, but only because it's the pathway to a lightness, that comes afterwards, that is really challenging because you have to offer that to yourself, right? No, it's even if you were to go out and apologize to somebody and they forgive you, there is, I think, a lot more freedom that comes from being able to forgive yourself in general in life. And so you're right. It sounds like could take a while and a lot of effort, but definitely a worthwhile place to start. And you talked about hustle culture, and I'm glad you brought that up, because after our last conversation, I was thinking about hustle culture in general. And I know that you say as part of your work that you do that you're anti-hustle culture. And so I kind of just sat for a moment. I tried to picture what a world would be like with no hustle culture. And it sounds lovely. And I would tend to subscribe to that as well, considering myself anti-hustle culture, because I can see and I have felt firsthand how damaging it can be. But then I thought it doesn't change the fact that there are still always, I think, going to be others around us who are willing to hustle extra and push themselves to these insane limits. And in a lot of cases, from where I'm sitting in life anyway, it seems like they do get the promotions and they do get the success. And so that makes becoming anti-hustle culture a tougher sell. And so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, or, are there any additional benefits to moving away from that entirely as a whole that could kind of override this, I think, short-term benefit that we seem to be getting from engaging in this hustle culture behavior right now?
Yeah. And I think one of the best ways to kind of start moving away from hustle culture is redefining what success and fulfillment mean for you.
Right.
Is success climbing the corporate ladder at any cost? If that's really, really, really what success and fulfillment means to you, go for it. If you don't mind, hustling, working 60 hours, 80 hours a week, then that's for you. I work with my clients, and I had to do this for myself too, is redefining what success and fulfillment means for me. And fulfillment means for me choosing what I want to do every single day. And if that does mean going to a job, it means, how am I going to show up at that job? What are my values that I want to show up in this job with? I don't want to hustle. I want to just, show up and love what I'm doing and leave at the time that I'm supposed to leave. And also, fulfillment. I think really a big thing I've learned in the last couple of years is putting fulfillment first. Is when you are spending time with your friends and family and loved ones, if you are taking your nights to do some self-care and like reading a book, taking a bath, doing movement, nourishing your body, then your hustle is going to be more aligned with your idea of success. So I think, and it's not going to happen overnight. Like, I work with my clients for months and months and months. Like, it's just something we work on week to week. And that's redefining what those mean to you. And of course, it always comes back with, what is your self-worth, right? And removing your worth from your job title and your work. And that's something that took me years to do too. But it's just starting to plant those seeds, and you can work on it day to day. So that's really like number one, is defining what success and fulfillment mean to you, and, taking the actions from there.
Yeah. And there's two things that I have to say about that. One is that the things that you mentioned, like movement and, the other self-care things that we can do for ourselves, they actually help us objectively be better. Like, I was reading a book recently. I think it's called Own Your Day, Own Your Life. And the author talks about how he's worked with Olympic athletes and just top performers, the Tony Robbins type, like, think big like that, already very successful, doing very well. I guess you could say have optimized their performance, but they haven't really, because then, they worked with him and he introduced the simplest things, like hydrate first when you wake up in the morning, do some movement, expose yourself to light. And it seems so simple. And yet they did better in the Olympics. They did better in their, these things are not something that I think are even debatable on whether they help you improve your hustle or not. Like, they are objectively healthier for us, and it can help us perform better. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, it makes me a little bit resentful, I will admit, that nobody, in my experience anyway, helps us think about what success and fulfillment means to us. Like, along the way, if you think about, elementary school, high school, college, whatever, when did anybody sit you down and say, what does success mean for you as an individual? Mm-hmm. Literally never, not in my experience anyway. And so I feel so strongly about that. And it just makes me really realize, and I know you know this already because this is your business, but it makes me realize how important it is to address these things on an individual level. There is no one recipe for success that you can find online, or that you can hear from somebody, right? The whole hustle culture thing is a prime example of that. We walk around living our life thinking that there is the right way to do your career, right? There is the path. If I say that, everybody already knows what I mean, because it's just been ingrained in us as sort of a copy paste cookie cutter solution for everyone, but it just doesn't work that way. And so I think investing the time in figuring out what your values are, what success and fulfillment means to you, is just like undebatably, I don't know if that's a word, but it is like the place that you have to start, when thinking about not just your career, but just your life in general, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So sorry, I got a little heated there, but I just feel so strongly about this, because I almost feel cheated a little bit by life, by society or something, that I had to come to this realization on my own. Luckily I'm still relatively young. I'm 28 years old. So fine, I have lots of time, but I've arguably wasted like almost $100,000 probably on education that I wouldn't have needed or done or bothered with if I had actually thought about this earlier in my life and had somebody, walk me through it in school or whatever when I was younger. So it's really, really important. And it's such a shame that we don't do more of that. So just on that note, like, thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing the work that you do, because like, I could cry right now at how important I think it is.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't realize it till my early 30s. And it's just something where you're like, you have to remove people's judgment and, what are people going to think of me, and do what's right for you, because you're the only one that lives in your body and your mind and your soul. And you're just have to live your life for you and what feels in alignment for you. And it's not easy to do, but it's definitely possible. And you're going to enjoy your life so much more.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm like legit tearing up a little bit. Oh gosh. No, that's great. That's very true. I did have sort of an unconventional question for you, and feel free to answer or not. But well, actually, before I ask it, you work primarily with women. Is that correct? As part of your business? Yeah. So as I was thinking about this idea of self-love in the workplace, I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on how you think that men could benefit from practicing self-love in the workplace. And this might come likely with a pretty heavy personal bias, but my assumption is that they might never think to invest in themselves in that way when it comes to their performance at work, and B, even if it was suggested to them, they may be less receptive to it because it may kind of err towards the emotional, which may be perceived as sort of a more feminine approach. So I'm wondering if you've ever thought about that, or if you have any thoughts on what the benefit might be for men to think about self-love as well for themselves.
Yeah. So the patriarchy isn't just holding women down. It's something that doesn't benefit men either, because they feel like they can't show that emotional side of themselves. Like they feel like they have to, just like when women go to the workplace, we feel like we have to be stoic and strong and we can't cry and we can't show any emotions. Like they probably feel that way too. And I think this work is so beneficial, and, it might have to be like repackaged and like called something different, but everyone should love themselves no matter what gender you are. And, feminine is strong. Showing emotions is strong. Being vulnerable is a sign of strength. Like that's all such strong work. And, as AI is coming up, like those human skills are going to be more important and take you further than like we can probably even imagine right now. So it's like, that's the human side. And unfortunately, I don't, I should talk to men more about this, but, I talked to my husband about it, and he feels like a lot of the time he, like can't show that side of himself at work. He always has to feel like he has to be positive and, but it builds up. And that's when that like rage comes out. Like another toxic thing is I've had a man shut the door on me and my coworker and scream at us at the top of his lungs for like 5 minutes. And that's because he felt the pressure coming from the higher ups. I was just thinking about this yesterday, and like I had blocked this out of my memory, but it like popped up. And I was like, sending him compassion. I was like, what? He probably did that because he had a 90-day contract and wasn't making the sales that he was supposed to. So he took that out on us. But he probably didn't have like the self-love tools to just be like, okay, that's, that's fine. I will find another job or like whatever. I don't know. I can't speak for him, but it like builds up for them in those sorts of ways where they're going to start to take their rage out. And I'm not, I feel like this is very general. I'm not saying like that's how all men are, but they feel like they can't show up either as their authentic selves, I'm sure. And, I don't work with men, so I might be putting words in their mouths, but yes, I think this work is so important for every gender for sure.
Yeah. And then, for what it's worth, and I'm very lucky in my current work team. I work with a group of people that are about my age, mix of men and women. And then I have my manager is I would say the previous generation of bankers. And the reason I say that is he has mentioned a couple of times, he's mentioned a couple of times that things are way different than they used to be. He's had lots of examples and experiences too of being screamed at as well, even as a man. Like, I think it was just also part of just the workplace culture that was okay to do when sales were down or whatever was going on. And he's said, though, that having a team of millennials, I guess we're all sort of in roughly the same age, has helped him. So it wasn't even a gender thing. It was just a generational thing, I think, that has helped him feel like he can open up and be more vulnerable and just talk about, like, we talk about mental health like openly. And this is like, Canada's biggest bank, and we're in national office. Like, you'd think that that's the epitome of like corporate, potentially toxic corporate culture. But it's not at all. And so I share that story because I think we are making a difference. And whether we are a woman or a man or, any other gender that, presents themselves at work authentically, I think it makes a difference upward, I'll say, and then also laterally to the people that we work with. So it is worthwhile work to do. I found that really sweet and encouraging to hear. And I also have a lot of respect for him because I think he has done some inner work too to break the cycles from his experiences before as well. So, it is all kind of related, right? Man or woman or not, like, this is just important stuff to think about and to try to put into practice as much as we can.
Yeah. And as the years go on, I might open it up to both genders. And I think it's really important for everyone to learn this work for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last thing that I wanted to just ask you about, Lindsey, because I know last time we chatted, you said that you also help leaders deal with ending burnout. And I just wanted to know, how does that fit into the work that you do now? I mean, I can assume that if we create a less toxic work environment, that we're less likely to burn out. But I'm wondering if there's anything on the burnout piece specifically that you have to share.
Yeah. So I think burnout is such like a widespread topic, and I could talk about it for like hours and hours. But I think, that really comes from the inner work that you're doing, and a way to stop it. We've talked a lot about like defining our values, and when you're not aligned with your values, you're going to start burning out. So I think that's such an important thing. Because your energy is just like being sucked out of you, because you're like, this is not who I am. Like, what the heck? And you're like burning out. But also in my Layers to Leadership system, we talk a lot about self-care, and, self-care is energy management, which is so important to burnout. And it's just taking care of yourself and doing things that you love. And, I feel we definitely address it in my, program, because it's such an important part. But I think just being true to you and having boundaries in place and managing your energy through boundaries and self-care is such an important way to just stop ending the burnout. Like, it starts with you and having your energy be in place. And, another thing that we really talk about in my program is cycle syncing. And, I think as women, we need to understand our energy fluctuates throughout the month. And that's something that I really wish I knew when I was working and, in these startups, is that it gives yourself permission to be like, okay, I'm going to be low energy today. Like, how can I show up and how can I be my best at this energy level? So it's really like energy management through boundaries, and fulfilling your life and creating joy. And I think that's a really big way to end the burnout, and hopefully just not even get to that point, right? Because every single day you're taking care of yourself.
For sure. Yeah. And actually, I've recently heard about cycle syncing. And I actually even heard that within a day, your energy levels can fluctuate in a certain pattern, I guess, maybe unique to you. And so thinking about how you can structure your day or your month, I guess, can be beneficial to help manage your energy. And I really like that you called it energy management. I never heard burnout be even related to energy management, but I think there's a lot to that because, a lot of times, let's say that I come home from work, but I am still thinking about work. It's not that I'm spending the time at work, but I'm still spending my energy on work. I'm learning to tell myself that it's okay to say, even if I have time for something in the calendar, I am so bad for this. If I see white space in my calendar, I will say yes to whatever it is because I have the time. But I've started trying to ask myself if I have the energy for it, because time is not the only resource that has to go into making something happen. Right. And so I think that's a worthwhile way to think about it that can help prevent burnout, hopefully. I'm trying it out now. I'll let you know how it goes. I'm not feeling burnt out just yet, but we'll see. So thank you for framing it that way, because I think that's a really good way to think about it. So Lindsey, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I'm looking at the clock. I felt like it was 10 minutes, but it was definitely more than 10 minutes already. But before we end, I just wanted to ask, where can people go to learn more about your work, the programs that you're running, or, if they want to hear more from you or follow your success, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram and TikTok at the Self Love Knowing, and then Facebook and LinkedIn. Just search Lindsey Maza and I'll pop up. And then my website is selfloveKnowing.com. And my program, Not Your Dad's Leadership, launches early September. So if you're ready and willing to do this work, just go check it out on my website.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, Lindsey, it was such a pleasure speaking with you today. I'm so grateful that you joined me for this, raw, real, vulnerable conversation. It's just so important to talk about. And I feel blessed that I even got to, share with you and learn from you and hear from you. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining. And I always like to thank our listeners too for their time and attention as well. Please make sure you all check Lindsey out online, and make sure you subscribe to Mindset Over Matter as well, so that you don't miss out on more great upcoming content that we have planned. So Lindsey, thanks so much once again, and take care.
Thank you.